Cape Cod Broadcasting weaves the listening environments of 99.9 WQRC, Ocean 104.7, WFCC Classical 107.5, Cape Country 104, and CapeCon.com's website experience to reflect the lifestyles of the people who live, work, and play on Cape Cod. We hope that you enjoy this podcast.
This is Sunday Journal. I'm Dan McCready. When discussion of land preservation comes up, people usually think of large wetland or wooded areas. However, backyard lots, under the right circumstances, could also be preserved through the work of trusts and the landowners themselves. Joining me today is Mark Robinson, Executive Director of the Compact of Cape Cod Conservation Trust, who will discuss the process and how it all works. And Mr. Robinson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Dan. I'm very happy to be here.
First off, for those who are maybe not so familiar with your organization, could you just tell us a little bit about the Compact itself?
Well, this is the Compact of Cape Cod Conservation Trusts, and we're a nonprofit service provider. We've been around since 1986, and our mission in life is to support the good work of nonprofit local land conservation trusts, as well as the 15 town governments here on the Cape that are been also actively engaged in preserving open space.
What was kind of the impetus to get you? You said you were kind of a group of co-ops?
Well, the Compact is a little bit unique in the United States, where we have lots of conservation groups. But here on the Cape in 1986, actually 2 years prior to that, a number of leaders of the land trusts on the Lower Cape particularly got together and over coffee decided that it would make sense to affiliate and to support the work of each other instead of just looking at our own parochial concerns within our town boundaries, to learn about what other groups are doing across those boundaries in other towns. It's all the same work in just different geographic areas. So they decided to affiliate and create this federation of nonprofit local land conservation trusts, and they called it the Compact of Cape Cod Conservation Trusts. And the idea, of course, behind a compact, just as the Mayflower Compact in 1620, was to provide some common sense of purpose and everybody agreeing to work together for the common good.
Now, onto the kind of topic at hand here. We're talking about basically preserving land, putting it under the care of a trust. And it doesn't appear that the land needs to be, I think most people get the idea that they need to have some huge amount of land in order to do this, but that's not necessarily the case.
It's not. Obviously, bigger is better in land conservation, particularly when we're trying to preserve major resource areas like public well fields, for instance. Here on the Cape back in the 1980s, a number of our towns made concerted efforts to preserve hundreds of acres around the public water supply wells. And you need that kind of geographic scope to be able to provide the water quality protection to the drinking water supply. But there are many reasons to preserve open space, and one of them is wildlife habitat. And there are very small habitat niches sometimes that can provide very important environmental value. For instance, vernal pools, where our rare salamanders breed in the spring. These are temporary pools, typically not even a half acre in size, but they're just wet and deep enough to provide the ability for amphibians to breed in. And so an acre or two around those pools might be very important to preserve and not have fertilized lawns come right down to the edge of them, or fill them in even.
So is that would more along? Okay, so we're talking about habitats. What else would make a land particularly a piece of parcel land particularly attractive to a trust?
Well, obviously we're not trying to set aside every building lot on Cape Cod. I understand growth is a necessary part of progress, but we've always been interested in identifying the most critical parts of the open space fabric here on the Cape. If you want to preserve the Cape Cod experience, you have to preserve parts of the Cape Cod landscape. I've always said that a true Cape Codder is somebody who feels most at home when he's out of doors. And so we need all sorts of different types of properties under open space protection, whether they be large or small, rare or common habitats, places that fit together in a mosaic that provides a lot of these values. Open spaces that link together to create a larger assemblage made up of many small pieces can be just as effective as one big piece that's put under a conservation easement or donated or sold for conservation purposes. So we're always on the lookout for ways to supplement larger anchor open spaces. And so, for instance, our new initiative trying to preserve land in and around the Cape Cod National Seashore, is really geared toward that theme. The National Seashore, we're lucky to have it. It's an anchor of 44,000 acres on the Lower Cape that has been set aside for more than 50 years now as a national park. But guess what? There are private properties within the Cape Cod National Seashore. It was established that way. It was intended to be a partnership among the federal government, the towns, the 6 towns which are located within the boundaries of the seashore, and frankly the 600 families that were allowed to remain in the National Seashore as private residences. These are people that were given certificates of exemption so that they could remain private residential properties within the seashore. And so many of these parcels do have conservation value to them. They might have one house on 8 acres or an undeveloped lot of a couple of acres, but they're in the National Seashore, and therefore they're part of that mosaic of open space.
Now, there are probably a lot of people who are listening who are saying, okay, conservation's all well and good, and, I like the environment and all that, but, I really don't want to give up my property. I don't want to give up my property and, I want to pass that on. I don't want that to leave my family. I don't want to just turn that over to some group. Is there a way that they can still hold on to it and contribute? Yeah,
exactly. And that's the benefit of this private nonprofit approach to land conservation, which is, I think we're pretty proud of here on the Cape, that we work so closely with private landowners to find the right approach that's useful to them, both from their family circumstances as well as their financial circumstances. So there is a tool to use for each given situation. People ask, do I have to part with the title to the property? I would like to keep it in the family. That's fine. That's great. Oftentimes private landowners are the best stewards of the property than any other group could be. They know the land. They've been taking care of it for many years. Why not take advantage of some of these land conservation techniques that will reward them for having taken care of the property in a enlightened stewardship way? And so there are these techniques. We have the conservation restriction tool. It's simply a contract that agreed to voluntarily by the landowner with a nonprofit land trust or the town or the National Seashore out that way, in which the landowner gives up certain development rights on part of the property but retains the right to own it, keep it as private property, does not require public access to it, and but maybe sets aside part of the property in a natural state and unavailable for further residential development. So a conservation restriction is a nice tool where people can keep title to their land, keep it in the family, pass it down through generations, but take advantage of these tax advantages. And the tax advantage is pretty powerful right now. We've had for a long time the federal income tax deduction. And that's simply an equation related to what is the value of the land without a restriction on it, and the difference between that and the value of the land with the restriction on it becomes a charitable deduction for federal income tax purposes. So that's been on the scene for many years, and many landowners. We have probably approximately 3,000 conservation restrictions throughout Cape Cod and the 15 towns. And so these are people who are continuing to live on the land, but they live lightly on the land. They've agreed to keep some of it in natural state while maybe still preserving a view or cutting some firewood or having a garden, the things that you do with accessory land under your control. But they also receive property tax relief relative to the impact of this restriction on their marketability of the property. And then we have this exciting new state income tax credit. It's a check from the state of Massachusetts called the Conservation Land Tax Credit. And it's up to $50,000 for people who are engaging in either donating land outright, selling it cheaply for conservation, or putting a conservation restriction on it. So we've used this $50,000 state tax credit about 30 different times in the last 3 years now here on the Cape. And it's a very popular program statewide. It has limited funds, so it's a first come, first serve each year. My office does all the paperwork to make sure the landowners that are entitled to that credit will receive it.
So there's incentives from the federal government, the state government, and even your local town government to go and do this.
That's right. And again, why are we as a society subsidizing people to not develop their land? I think that we use the tax code to induce social change in many different ways, some that not everybody agrees with. But as a society, at all these levels of government, we have decided that conservation is a value, land conservation is a value, open space protection is a value, to be able to preserve the natural resources that are so vital here on the Cape. The Cape is a sole source aquifer. What does that mean? And what are we going to do about it? It means that we don't have a Quabbin Reservoir away across the bridge. It's under our feet. That's where our Quabbin Reservoir is. And so everything that we're doing on the land surface, whether it be natural, unfiltered, pure rainwater, or whether it be hazardous chemicals and pharmaceuticals and pesticides and fertilizers, all that other stuff is going to get into the groundwater from which we drink. So here in the Cape, sole source aquifer means you have to provide open space protection in order to filter out things around the well fields. Otherwise, we'll have no water left to drink here. And, all of the natural resources that we have, rare species habitat, the Cape is known nationally for its shorebird nesting colonies, particularly on our barrier beaches. And so it's important to set aside those critical areas as protected habitat. And other things, just think of scenic views. Where would we be without the protected property on Route 28 that looks out across the cranberry bogs in Falmouth or Witchmere Harbor? These are scenic vistas that the public treasures, and they all have protected open space in front of them to provide that view.
Now, I understand one of the areas that you're particularly focusing on is the Lower Cape. What is the appeal of the Lower Cape? Why use so much attention in that area?
Well, we operate throughout the entire county from Falmouth and Sandwich to Chatham and Provincetown. This new effort that we're kicking off this month, which we call Living Lightly on the Land, Protecting Land in and Around the Cape Cod National Seashore, is really a thematic approach for the Lower Cape to rally around, we hope, so that landowners will understand that their property in and of itself may be important to preserve, but it is also part of, or in addition to, this major open space element, the National Seashore. And not all of the land in and around the National Seashore is protected. So we want to make sure that it's really serving as a focus point for some of these efforts going forward, and trying to make an extra effort in that area. The Lower Cape, Wellfleet, Eastham, Truro, Provincetown, that's the narrowest part of our narrow land, and everything that goes on in terms of growth and development is magnified there. We have towns that are still relying on private wells. And so each individual landowner has a septic system and a well on their same property most of the time. So, again, setting aside areas of open space, even in neighborhoods, is important for these private wells to be protected. And so the Lower Cape is more sensitive. It's smaller. Growth impacts are magnified there. The resource features, such as the sole source aquifer in those towns, are even more limited than they are up Cape.
And is there any kind of a qualification that you might have that might make you ineligible if you're a property owner? Is there any kind of property owner that just wouldn't be able to take advantage of that? Is there any restrictions?
Well, there's no size restriction in terms of area of property that's useful for some of these conservation techniques. It really gets to what is the resource value of the property. A house on an acre lot with a backyard, whether it's in woods or lawn, may not be appropriate for some of these techniques. But a house on an acre with an extra acre or two behind it that is in a natural wooded pitch pine woodland, maybe that might be appropriate, particularly if it's abutting some other conservation land or has some attributes that make it important, such as groundwater protection for private wells in the neighborhood. So you really have to look at each one case by case. Part of what my staff does at the Compact of Cape Cod Conservation Trusts is to analyze properties for landowners, suggest which of these techniques is most appropriate, and which ones will generate the tax advantages that some people are looking for. Not everybody is looking for tax advantages. There's an awful lot of people who donate land or these conservation restrictions who do it out of the love for the land. I'd be out of business if people didn't love their land. There aren't enough tax advantages and cash incentives available to motivate all the people that have donated things over the years on Cape Cod. There are over 8,000 acres that are protected just by the small local land trusts here on the Cape, and that's not counting some of the larger pieces like Mass Audubon's Wellfleet Bay Sanctuary, which is hundreds of acres on Cape Cod Bay. So, those 8,000 acres have come forward 1 acre, 2 acres, 8 acres at a time, and the average size of these pieces is about 5 acres. So you can see that you try to cobble together these pieces so that they can provide a whole that is greater than the sum of the parts.
And as you said, if some people might be just intimidated by the whole process of it, the paperwork involved. But as you said, they can call an organization like yours, and you guys will help them with that.
Well, it is a specialized field, and fortunately, here on the Cape, we have some of the best experts in Massachusetts to guide people making these important and sometimes complex financial decisions on what to do with their property. I think that when you're considering what to do with your land, you don't want to just call the local realtor. You should call a realtor and find out what the land might be worth. But you should also make a second phone call to one of the sources of information about other options for the land conservation options. And those include the local nonprofit land trusts. We have one now in each town on the Cape. We have for many years. The oldest land trusts on the Cape are in Chatham and Falmouth, go back more than 50 years themselves. So we have that expertise. My office is in Barnstable, and we provide free and private and consultation for landowners who just want to ask questions. There's no obligation to do anything. We don't have that kind of power. We just have to rely on people thinking that it makes sense. And fortunately, we do about 45 projects each year throughout the Cape. So that's 45 different families that are making that decision that, gee, there is something in this land conservation technique and options that are available, and they pursue it and they complete it. And they're happy that they do. One of the things that we have provided is our new booklet, which doesn't show up very well on radio, but it's called To Live Lightly on the Land. It's called a private guide to land protection in the Cape Cod National Seashore. And again, though it's geared toward the seashore, the tools and techniques and tax benefits that we describe in the booklet are all available to landowners throughout the Cape. And so this information is available in booklet form. We have a video which describes some of it. And again, people can contact us in my Barnstable office.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we're just about out of time, but I did want to thank you so much for coming in today and discussing this very important issue with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for having me.
My guest today was Mark Robinson, Executive Director of the Compact of Cape Cod Conservation Trust. To learn more about the trust and how you could set aside private land for preservation, visit the Compact's website, thecompact.net. I'm Dan McCready, and this is Sunday Journal.
This podcast is a presentation of Cape Cod Broadcasting, which is solely responsible for its content.